Welcome to MarcusG.TV and Chef on a Mission Radio. Say hello, Jamie.
Hello.
Jamie joins me today in the studio. Today we're going to talk about chocolate. Halloween's coming up, and as restaurateurs, we use a lot of chocolate in our restaurant. We use a lot of chocolate. Most restaurants do use a lot of chocolate, and people love chocolate. However, Jamie, there's some controversy on certain types of chocolate or certain regions of chocolate. Are you up with that?
Yes.
On the child labor issues?
You know, I hear it. I've seen it posted quite a bit lately. You know, I know what you've told me. I read about it ever so often when I do see it popping up. And, you know, of course, I can always learn more, and I'm sure that, you know, everybody else can learn more too.
Exactly. So we go to an organic food show every year where we meet with a lot of chocolate suppliers, right?
Yes.
Lot of chocolate suppliers, a lot of organic chocolate suppliers. So we have a lot of choices when it comes to buying chocolate. The average consumer, when they go to the store, has Nestle, Mars, you know, there's the big brands. When it comes to chefs, again, it comes to Nestle, it comes to Callebaut, it comes to Hershey, it comes to the big brands. So here's the issues with chocolate. First off, I suggest that nobody buys African chocolate. 42% of the world's production of chocolate comes from the Ivory Coast alone in Africa. About 3/4 roughly comes from Africa. So all the chocolate you eat across the world, 3/4 of it is actually coming from Africa. Now the issue in Africa is child labor. Now if you go into the websites of Callebaut, all these companies...
Is it only Africa, Marcus, that there's child labor problems?
Well, yes and no. Africa is the big culprit.
Okay.
The other issue is, well, where else does chocolate come from? Well, it comes from Indonesia, it comes from South America. The issue here is that Africa is the worst.
Okay.
Not saying it doesn't happen in South America, it just doesn't happen in South America nearly as much, nearly as rampant, maybe not as young of an age. And we're going to get into some of these ages of where they take boys and girls. They basically... There's a lot of child trafficking involved in chocolate. Every time you eat chocolate, some boy, some little girl, 10, 12 years old, 8 years old, is probably suffering because you're eating that one piece of chocolate in Africa. So South America may have certain problems, but not nearly as bad. Bali may have some, but not nearly as bad.
Okay.
Africa is the worst culprit.
Okay.
I suggest watching this documentary. It's a really great documentary called The Dark Side of Chocolate. I just watched it, just this morning I watched it, in fact, and it was really a great eye-opening. I knew a lot of that in there. I knew where they were going with it. I've done a ton of research, because being restaurateurs, we want to be as green, as socially responsible as possible, you know,
sustainable,
as sustainable,
and to support the right people, the right choices.
The right choices. So I've been up on the chocolate situation for years upon years. So that's why we only buy South American wild, you know, really hand-picked, handcrafted chocolate that's really at a high level, and we know where it's coming from. Now, however, these big companies have no idea where their chocolate's coming from. So they buy from co-ops. These are all co-ops, and they're small farms. So let's jump right into this.
Are there any companies that know exactly where their chocolate is coming from?
There are.
Is it easy to find, or are they difficult to find?
No, they're getting easier and easier to find.
Okay.
Those companies, but they're still those companies are still not the norm. But yes, those companies. One of the bigger brands, Valrhona, has their single origins. They still source from Africa, Valrhona, but they have a lot of single origins that come from South America.
Okay.
They're actually showing you the region it's coming from. Now, that's just the region. Now, there are some places that get really, really strict, but there's such high-end chocolate distributors that they actually show you the actual farm that it's coming from, the actual farm, the actual part where it's being foraged, maybe it's being wild foraged. So here's the issue with Africa. First off, Africa's chocolate's not native to Africa at all. Chocolate was brought over by cultivators, by explorers. It was brought over to cultivate in Africa. It grows well in Africa. Chocolate grows in that 2020, you know, just north of the equator, just south of the equator. So they grow within equatorial places around the globe. So Africa's perfect. The Ivory Coast, Ghana, perfect, perfect, perfect. What happens with chocolate is you can't just take the seed and plant it. It doesn't grow. You have to graft it. So chocolate has been hybridized and grafted, and now it was planted all over Africa, of course, through this equatorial zone. So it's not the original strain of chocolate. What happens when you don't have the original strain of chocolate? You have chocolate, or you have any plant like cultivated blueberries versus wild blueberries, that is a weaker plant. It needs more chemicals, it needs more pesticides, it needs more maintenance. What happens when you hybridize stuff as well is it loses its natural nutrients, like its minerals, vitamins, and antioxidants. So all those studies you hear on chocolate, how it's such high in antioxidants and this and that, chocolate's so different, and chances are the chocolate that you're eating is not the chocolate that they're talking about in the studies. So wild chocolate versus cultivated hybridized chocolate is totally different. Wild blueberry versus cultivated blueberry, totally different. In fact, the antioxidants in blueberries, wild blueberries versus cultivated, can be 3 times the amount. The antioxidants are things...
Well, I think they're also talking about, you know, not putting tons of ingredients into the chocolate to make it taste really good.
That's exactly right.
So
they're not talking about going to the store and buying a candy bar to get your antioxidants. They're talking about eating the raw bean itself.
Right, or the
nibs, the cacao bean itself in its raw form, without being processed, without the the fat being taken out of, without all that processing. That's what they're talking about.
But people hear chocolate and they're like, I'm going to go have a chocolate bar today because it's really good for me and it's got really high antioxidants.
Right,
Which it probably does have some antioxidants in it, but not after it's been processed. And
so then these people will say, well, gee, you know what, I'm going to have a dark chocolate bar because I know the dark chocolate's good. Dark chocolate is still 30, 40, 50% sugar. Still that much sugar. There's 30% sugar, so 30% by volume. So 70% chocolate, 30% sugar. It's still sugar loaded. There's still a whole detriment to your health by consuming all that sugar. It's like these sports drinks. Well, let's get some potassium in us through Gatorade with all the sugar in it, right? So it's one of those things where it's a trade-off. So where was I going with this, Jamie? We were going somewhere before the hybridized. Oh, so blueberries. So 3 times the antioxidants in blueberries versus, the cultivated versus the wild. So chocolate is going to be along the same line. It's a hybridized version. So that's why Africa, Indonesia is really out, that whole region there, because chocolate originates from Central and South America. That's where the original rootstock is. That's where the original chocolate is. So, I did a lot of research here, and I called Callebaut a couple years ago. We've spoken to all the big guys. I speak to all the big guys at all the trade shows. I just spoke to Girardelli yesterday, Jamie.
Oh, really?
Because a Facebook post got me involved in this, and it's Halloween, so it's perfect time for a post like this. So I called Girardelli, and they put me on. They said, well, I just asked, where do you source your beans from? Where is the chocolate coming from? I want to know as a consumer where it's coming from. They turned me on to then... they took my number and had somebody call me from their Central Affairs office.
Wow, they had someone call you back.
They called me back right away. And you know what she said? I said, I just want to know where your beans come from. She goes, I'm not at liberty to tell you that.
Really? Well, if they're doing the right thing, why are they wanting to hide where their chocolate
comes from? She goes, we'll send you a whole dissertation on our policies and everything, which I didn't get. I gave her my email address. I did not get it via email. They called me back right away. They never emailed me. But she goes, I'm not at liberty to tell you where the beans come from. I think that's kind of odd, because we're in a day and age now
where people care about what they're eating and what they're putting in their body.
Food transparency is a major #1 topic right now, being transparent in your food. So shame on you, Girardelli, for not being able to tell me where you're sourcing your beans from. You must be ashamed of something. So Callebaut sources from Africa. Callebaut is the #1 fancy French, chocolate for chefs. Pastry chefs love Callebaut. It's the big thing. In a high-end restaurant, you're getting Callebaut. So I spoke to the guy from 45 minutes, the PR guy at Callebaut, and he tells me they're building schools, or they're keeping kids out of the workforce. They're encouraging them to go to school. They're handing out pamphlets. And I said, okay, this is great, but do you own the farms? And are you on the farms? And he said, no, we're not. I said, so where are you doing this? He goes, we're doing this we own the processing plant. Of course you own the processing plant, because you're buying chocolate and you're a chocolate maker. So they own the processing plants, they own the facilities. So in the central cities where the processing plants are, that's where they're encouraging the kids to stay in school. and building schools. But out in the countryside, where all the
farms are,
they have no control. They're all these small farms. There's thousands upon thousands of small chocolate farms, and they don't know. They're not there. They're not going to the farms. They're only buying through a co-op. So the beans, sometimes in certain countries, the beans actually go right to the government, and the government then redistributes the beans. So they have no idea. But in this documentary, it was so all these officials in Ivory Coast are saying there's no trafficking here. The big guys of the chocolate company are saying there's no child labor. And this guy went out and did a documentary. He went out in the fields, and there's kids everywhere. He videotaped kids getting trafficked across the border via motorcycles on back roads, kids getting abandoned at bus stops, 10, 12-year-old kids, 14-year-old kids
shame,
that thought they were going for work, or downright kidnapped. And the chocolate farmers pay 230 euros per kid. The kids never get paid for their work. They interviewed kids that actually escaped. It's so hard to escape. It's basically slavery. These 17 years olds and 15 years old that they got and found interviewed, the one said they had to run through the night and hide at night, and they found a guy who actually was able to get them to rescue. He goes, but they come after you and they beat you, and if you don't work fast enough, they beat you. It's downright torture is what these kids were saying on these chocolate farms. And like I said, we've known about this. This is why we don't buy any African chocolate, nothing whatsoever. I mean, our chocolate comes from a really, really clean source, and we're so proud of the chocolate that we buy. It's wild, harvested, it's really awesome. But back to this African thing. So these officials are saying it's not happening. These officials are saying, oh, well, there might be a problem, but we have all the means in control. Now, all the big chocolate conglomerates in 2002 signed this whole treaty, Jamie. It's on the thing. They signed this whole treaty that by 2008, everything's going to be clean, no child labor, this and that. This documentary was shot after 2008. There's not much. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all just paper. It's like Callebaut having this great statement, but they're not on the farms. So they have these policies, they have all these things in effect, but in reality, it's still going on day in and day out, day in and day out. So yes, they interviewed the one guy from Sav Cacao, the third largest producer there, and he goes, there's nothing, I've never heard of child. He denied everything. I've never heard of it, I've never seen kids. Then all of a sudden, they approach him and say, okay, this organization just busted and they freed 65 kids. What do you have to say about this? And he's like, oh, well, it is a problem and they're working on it. So he goes from one extreme to another when he was presented on camera. Totally two different sides of the story. Hershey's, Mars, all these guys, Callebaut, Nestle's, they know that it's going on. They know it. But they're not on the farms. They can't control. They tell you that they're controlling it to a certain extent because they've signed paperwork and they've done things, but they're not on the farms and they don't know what's going on. So that's a major issue of all African chocolate. So we just avoid all African chocolate. I don't buy anything from Indonesia. I really, it's really hard to when you pick chocolate to pick the right chocolate. We're going to do a whole video on the right chocolate, but I just thought it was so important to make this segment, this video, this segment for the radio show, especially on, Halloween's coming up, and it's really chocolate that necessary. I mean, we think of chocolate just as an everyday as an everyday item, as sort of a commodity, as sort of something that, but to kids that are in Africa, this is their livelihood. I mean, this is their life. They're enslaved to make chocolate for us. And here's my big issue. Farm-to-table restaurants that say they're farm-to-table, if you're serving African chocolate and you're a farm-to-table restaurant, shame on you. Totally shame on you. You go out of your way to buy from local farms and do the right thing, and if you're not taking your chocolate to the strictest, highest level, because you're actually supporting slave labor in your restaurant by buying that, shame on you. You need to do your research. If you're a farm-to-table restaurant advertising farm-to-table, you've got to do your research. You've got to get rid of, in my opinion, you've got to get rid of African chocolate. Without a doubt, African chocolate cannot be part of your menu whatsoever. And if you're a fancy French restaurant charging all this money and Michelin 3-star and this and that, shame on you. In fact, shame on you at all if you're serving this, especially if you know about it. Because I know other chefs know about this. Because you got to be living blind these days if you don't know about it and you're a chef about these kind of issues. If you know about them and you're not doing something, shame on you. So, what's the next step, Jamie? I mean, what?
Pay attention. Pay attention to what you're bringing into your restaurant, into your body, serving to, you know, your family, friends. Make good choices. We know it's going to be more expensive, but make better choices. Think about those children that are actually making that chocolate for you, or you know,
being forced. So here's the deal. When you go to a restaurant, ask. Say, are you supporting fair? Now, you can't go by what Ghirardelli and Callebaut, because all their things say, all the bags say fair labor, right? They all say fair labor. That's BS. You've got to be getting something that's truly from South America for fair labor. It has to be fair labor certified. It has to be somewhere that if it's from Africa and they're doing that and they're right, because that's all BS. That's smoke and mirrors. You've got to throw all that out the window. So you need to demand better chocolate in restaurants. You need to demand single estate, source verified South American chocolate is the best way to go. Is all chocolate perfect? I'm sure there's something wrong with, you can find something wrong with all regions of chocolate, but we're trying to avoid what we know is the worst right now. So I'm Chef Marcus Guiliano and Jamie. Thanks for watching this video. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening. Thanks for subscribing to our channel. Thanks for sharing this. Thanks for passing it on. Let us know your thoughts on chocolate. Leave some comments. Thanks for watching.